The Iron Flute, Case 41. Tozan's Tripitaka. Master Tozan said, the entire collection of Buddhist texts collected in the Tripitaka can be expressed with one letter. Master Hakuun illustrated these words of Tozan with a poem. Each stroke is clear, but no explanation accompanies it. Buddha tried to write it, but failed many a time. Why not give the job to Mr. Wang, the calligraphy master? His skillful hand may accomplish it beautifully. Nyogen Senzaki's comment. The Tripitaka, meaning 3 baskets in Sanskrit, contains the Sutra Pitaka, scriptures, the Vinaya Pitaka, precepts and regulations of monastic life, and the Abhidharma Pitaka, philosophical commentaries on the teachings. At the time of this koan, there were 5,048 volumes comprising the entire text, which Tozan asserts can be expressed with one letter. What is this letter? Pay no attention to Hakuun's poem. If he meant it as a satire, it is a bad joke on himself. On this third watch of this one-day Rohatsu, amid snowflakes, we meet Tozan Ryokai Zenji, who lived from 807 to 869 in China. He was the co-founder of the Soto school with Sozan Honjaku, and he was the Dharma heir of Ungan and a great poet, best known for his verses on the 5 ranks of the apparent and the real, which is really the most advanced level of koan work. Using poetry to convey states of realization. Tozan studied with Nansen, Isan, and Ungan, where he had his first opening experience with the national teacher Nanyo Eichu's sermons of insentient creatures. In an exchange, Tozan asked his teacher, Ungan, when I want to see it face to face, what should I do? Perhaps this has occurred to you. Ungan said, ask someone who's done it. Tozan said, that's what I'm doing. Ungan said, what can I tell you? Or what can I tell you? Or what can I tell you? There are many ways you can take it. When Tozan was about to leave Ungan's place, he asked, in the future, if someone were to ask me to describe your teaching, how should I reply? After a long pause, Ungan said, say, just this is it. You remember he asked Ungan earlier, when I want to see it, right? That was only a paragraph ago. Remember, everybody? Yes. When I want to see it. After a long pause, Ungan said, just say, just say. Just this is it. Tozan sighed. Then Ungan said, now that you have taken on this matter, investigate it thoroughly. Tozan still had some doubt. Later on, wading across a stream, he saw his reflection in the water. And at that moment, had great breakthrough and wrote this verse. Seeking it from others, I became further estranged from it. Now that I go by myself, I meet it everywhere. Now it is just what I am. Now I am not what it is. Understanding this way, I can be as I am. So Tozan tells us today the entire collection of Buddhist texts in the Tripitaka can be expressed with one letter. No need for sutra repositories. No need for those big glass cases in the Kaisando. Just one letter. You may bring, all right? So as Nyogen Senzaki said in his comment, we have the Vinaya, rules, ethical behavior. We have sutras and shastras and all the commentaries, and then we have the Abhidharma, metaphysics, philosophical treatises on reality, psychology, volume upon volume. Millions of words, multi-millions of letters in Pali or characters in Chinese. But what Tozan is saying, there's a single letter. What is it? What is the one character that expresses these teachings? We just chanted Song of Zazen, and we said the words, all these return into this. And Master Hakuun Shutan, who lived 200 years after Tozan, admired Tozan's statement and composed this verse. This one letter, this one character, each stroke is clear, but no explanation accompanies it. In other words, all those commentaries, all those words, not one. Then he said, Buddha tried to write it, but failed many a time. How can anything be said about it? Buddha taught for 49 years and failed wonderfully throughout. And of course, Hakuun's humor. Well, I guess Buddha couldn't do it, so let's ask Mr. Wang, who's a really good calligrapher, and he will accomplish the task. Just an ordinary man, an adept of calligraphy, can so beautifully portray each character in its perfect form. Hakuin Zenji said, the 49 years the old Indian Shakyamuni spent teaching sentient beings is ultimately summed up in a single instant of thought. This one instant, one letter. And then he said, when the mind of a person absorbed in samadhi suddenly opens up in perfect clarity, and the light of wisdom shines forth, it is like splitting open a particle of dust and seeing within it the entire body of Vairochana Buddha. Splitting open. What's this remind you of? The atom, right? This Big Bang. Birth of the universe. Minute particles of a quark. All expanding and expanding. All Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, this entire body of Vairochana Buddha. Right here. One letter in that instant becomes all 5,048 volumes of the Tripitaka in all languages, sentient beings' languages, insentient creatures' languages. Do you hear? Do you hear the snowflakes? And then it goes in the other direction, back into the tiniest particle. Always expanding, always contracting. Birth, death, alive. Who needs LSD? Shinge Roshi told us, there are many kinds of sutras, but all of them are condensed into Namu Dai Boastsu, and this is condensed into Mo And this is condensed into just Zazen. Or just this is it. Not only four-dimension world in which we human beings live, he said, but also the 5, 6, and endless dimension worlds are all condensed into this Namu Dai Boastsu. This untouchable, unthinkable universal world is each one of us. Not only each one of us, but each one of our cells. Each of your cells is an enlightened one. No need to say Buddha. This is true. True fact. You agree with Shinge Roshi? Yeah. Why not, right? Why not, instead of sitting here, oh, so I can't believe we have another 5 days. Maybe it's more like 10 days because it's going to be so late and so I'm going to be tired and I'm going to be in pain. No! Each of your cells is an enlightened one. You know, Diamond Sutra tells us all these atoms are not really such. They are just called atoms. A cell is not really a cell, just called a cell. A world is not really a world. It's just called a world. Today we heard this, right? This is not it. It is just the name given to it. Cup. Lectern. So we get these names and we think, oh, okay. I know. Now I know what to do. But you know also, at the same time, that naming it keeps us from intimacy with it. And keeps us from hearing these sermons of insentient creatures. We see temporary forms. We think they're going to be here forever. This mountain, this gong, each one of us, and all of our illusory thoughts we take to be reality. And we apply names and labels and definitions, and we subscribe to, as it says, the notion of things as having intrinsic qualities, an ego entity, a personality, being, or separated individuality. This is the key theme of the Diamond Sutra, right? Now what something really is, as Shinge Roshi said, is unnameable, ungraspable. But we cannot see it. Why? Why? Because we are it. Seppo's grain of rice, William Blake's world in a grain of sand. Each tiny speck of dust is the whole of it. Just as our DNA has all cellular information, any one little strand tells the whole thing. So to meet this, to feel this deeply is what we're doing in session. To be intimate with it all. No separate it there and I here. Shodo Harada told us the other morning, when the eyes that see the world and the world that is seen are completely one and the same, we know for the first time the true essence of life. Beyond any sound, our body is pierced through by the cold winter air with which it has become one. Anyone can memorize the Buddha's or the ancestors' words and repeat them. But can we manifest that state of mind? Forgetting time, forgetting your body, sit until you merge with the heavens and earth. Do zazen to this point and taste the flavor of this living actuality. So how do we express truth, our truth, not as something written down and put in volumes, in glass cases or repositories through the ages, but the truth of our very being right here, right now? We heard Subhuti say in the Diamond Sutra, as I understand Buddha's meaning, there is no formulation of truth called supreme enlightenment. Truth is uncontainable and inexpressible. It neither is, nor is it not. Some 2,580 years ago, a prince of the Shakya clan named Siddhartha Gautama sat down, resolving not to get up again until he realized this uncontainable, inexpressible truth. And on the 8th day, seeing the morning star, experienced great realization. The star shining, Buddha shining. Millions of years in the past, that star was born. incalculable space between that star and Buddha, right there. And he awakened to what? To what he already was, and said, "Wonderful! I and all beings together are perfect and complete." This is Shinge Roshi's calligraphy. Wonderful. And yet, Buddha was keenly aware of the misery of beings trapped in ignorance of this fundamental truth. And he continued sitting, looking into this, seeing dukkha. All the variations on this misery, seeing the origin, how and why, and to what extent, all the patterns that lead to this suffering. Seeing the path, seeing the cessation of suffering, and then the path to be liberated, to just stop all that self-absorbed grasping and running away. And he taught us these noble truths. And that is what we are doing, very simply. Day in, day out. Experiencing our own dukkha. Seeing the source of our own dukkha. Letting everything completely stop. Stillness, beyond stillness, emptiness beyond emptiness, and then vow, path of this endless vow. So we are sitting together in this way, looking bravely, courageously, not running from it, and transforming. Later on, Buddha held aloft a flower that was smiling, as all flowers do, and silently giving it all away, he transmitted this wordless truth to Ma Kashapa, who smiled back. Yes. Mutual, silent confirmation. Nothing to give, nothing to receive. Two mirrors reflecting one another. No shadow in between. The entire Tripitaka, at that moment, in that flower, The Diamond Sutra again says, words cannot explain the real nature of the universe. And yet, the oral teachings were written down in letters, characters, put into volumes of words after words. So I was reading the other day Shinge Roshi's words. He said, if a teaching outside the scriptures does not admit the teaching within the scriptures, then it is not a true teaching. To illumine one's mind with old learning at a bright window during the day, and to deepen one's discernment of the principle by sitting in the Zendo during the night. This is indeed to illumine one's own nature with the teachings, and to illumine the teachings with one's own nature. Inside and outside are one. I met Shinge Roshi years ago in the early 70s at New York Zendo. Wonderful teacher who left no Dharma heirs. Lived nearly as a hermit in the middle of New York City. So, I'm a writer. I've always used words to try to understand circumstances, particularly challenging ones, looking into situations of difficulty as koans by writing. What is the truth in this? How can I clarify this? How can I come from the clarity of mirror mind to what seems so chaotic and so hard to really see clearly? How can I get to the heart of it? Trying to make it real, the old jazz song said. So I often go through many drafts of what I think I understand and throw that away and sift through and pare away and check to see, am I the unreliable narrator of my life? More than likely. Another draft. As you know, as soon as we put things into words, it can shift very quickly to some personal view or aversion. Not aversion, a version of what we think we understand. And there's often some emotional blindsiding that's going on. And if I'm bound by distinctions of a separated individuality, as the Diamond Sutra will tell us soon, feelings of anger and hatred certainly will be aroused in me. So to try to see beyond blame, beyond self-justification, beyond self-other, is the challenge, right? Yesterday, Jisho spoke about the meeting in New York City, November 21st. And Dai Roshi, in his opening remarks, apologized for relationships with his students, and then in his confession, named a student. That would be me. Well, you know, it's the year of the sheep, so I was the sacrificial lamb. I'm a sheep. And so ever since, I've been sitting with this particularly challenging koan. And it goes back 40 years to May of 1975. Dai Roshi and I had just finished writing his section of Namu Dai Boastsu. And we had been sharing a lot of details about each other's lives. And as a result, there was a kind of vibration of great intimacy. And in this, he suddenly reached over and embraced me. It seemed, although a little surprising, a natural expression of affection. But then it turned sexual. And afterward, he told me never to speak about it. And a few days later, he left for New York City. And when he returned to DBZ, it was as if it had never occurred. He was quite cold, in fact, and distant during the weeks that followed, and nothing was ever said about it. And of course, it was a rather confusing time for me. I never did tell anyone. Not my husband, not my mother or sister or aunt, not my mentors in the sangha. Not even months later, when other women started comparing notes about similar relationships. And I started wondering, was that really a mutual loving encounter that got out of hand? Or was it just another seduction on his part? What was the truth? What really happened? That Rohatsu, 40 years ago, exactly. I don't know if it was the third day or the fourth day, but Shinge Roshi had gone into solitary retreat upstairs, had not been seen really since it began. Dai Roshi came into the Zendo and he said something to the effect of, I am disbanding the sangha. Those of you who wish to reapply to be my students may do so. This was quite a shock to us all sitting there. And Shinge Roshi did not come down. Later, of course, I understood he had been told so many painful stories and really couldn't, I don't know what to say, couldn't do anything, didn't know how to deal with it, was so deeply hurt himself about his Dharma heir's conduct. In any case, he did not come when DBZ was formally opened July 4th, 1976. So my first husband, Lou Nordstrom, and I left that January. Almost the entire sangha left. We went to Syracuse. And our practice was, at first, quite derailed. But little by little, because there were already wonderful students practicing in Syracuse, we began forming a Zendo there. And I practiced with Maureen Stewart until her death in 1990. And not too long after that, I got a letter from Jumpo Dennis Kelly, who was vice abbot here. And he said, "Things have changed. I'd really like it if you would come back." And there was this hunger in me to practice here again. And I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. And gingerly at first, Dai Roshi and I started practicing together, working together. And I went full steam ahead. More and more, session after session, and found this strong Dharma relationship. Session, Doksan, amazing experiences through our koan work. And I just kept practicing and basically ignored everything else. There wasn't much else one could really see. Occasional little notes of gossip here and there, but I ignored it all and just felt so excited by the way things were advancing and the way my own practice was deepening. In the early 90s, we had what was billed as a confidential meeting of sangha women down at the Jirakuan. Most of our motivation had to do with the fact that women weren't allowed to hold leadership roles in the Zendo, believe it or not. And so we drew up a kind of Bill of Rights. And then someone asked, how many of us had been approached by Dai Roshi for sex? Nearly everyone raised her hand. Not long after that, Jumpo left. No one ever said why. It was only in the last couple of years that I found out. Of course, it had to do with someone he was very close to, who was in a relationship with Shinge Roshi. So since the meeting in New York City, November 21st, all this has come to the fore. I've been asking myself a lot of questions. What did I feel back in 1975? It's kind of embarrassing to say, but I was grateful for his affection. Maybe that's why I remember the embrace, but not the sex. I'm sure he doesn't remember it that way. I know it happened, but I have to wonder, was I dissociating? Or was it just that craving for love? And that's made me reflect on the pattern of my distant past. This koan work is very interesting. Okay, so these are not the kinds of things normally talked about in teisho. But they're the only things we should be talking about in teisho. Please don't misunderstand me. But we, as Nyogen Senzaki told us, have to take off the wrappers. This is real life. Real anguish. Real joy. It's not either or. So I started reflecting, and I thought, all during my adolescent and teen years, older men were hitting on me. Among them was one of my parents' closest friends who would invite me out to dog shows, he had dachshunds, and molest me regularly. Somehow the little wieners, I don't know. Anyway, I was between the ages of 10 and 13. Why was I such a target? So I was thinking, in a way, sex was the price one had to pay for male attention. And I'm sure men were picking up on my need for fatherly love, because I had lost my father. When I was a year and a half old, he was killed at the end of World War II in the Battle of the Bulge. My mother remarried. I was 4. The man she remarried had just returned from the war in the Pacific. with very deep psychological wounds. I think he was pretty crazy before the war, but he was definitely a handful when we got to him. He would go into these violent rages, and I seemed to be the one. The dog and I were the ones that were most frequently beaten. And in those days, I'm talking about the 1950s, no one ever talked about any of this. Not the beatings, not the sexual molestation, not the time a man I thought was a friend of my parents said, "Would you like a ride to your ballet class?" I told him where I was going. I said, "Sure." And we ended up in an abandoned construction site. Not the confusion of civilian life for shell-shocked vets. They didn't call it PTSD back then. Not the sound of my mother's sobbing behind the locked door of her bedroom. Not our desperate poverty after my stepfather lost his job as art teacher in the regional high school after he threw a student down a flight of stairs. So I learned how to be silent. This is the first time I'm ever talking about any of this. So sorry to burden you, but in 2010, after a woman here revealed she had been having an affair with Dai Roshi, the Zen Studies Society, sangha, and board were in turbulent disarray. We called the Faith Trust Institute in to help us. And again, just like back in 1975, intense emotions, anger, grief, dismay, disillusionment, confusion. Only this time I was on the board. So we held a sangha meeting at New York Zendo. And I was confronted by a man who belligerently demanded, "Did you have sex with Ado?" I still remember the tumult of my emotions. Yes or no? Neither felt accurate. What had occurred? Didn't feel that simple. And so this is all going on, like the last moment of your life, your whole life comes before you. It's all going on, instant. It's one instant. Yes or no? If I said yes, I would be betraying Dai Roshi. My feelings of loyalty were really strong. I didn't want to make things worse for him. And of course, he had told me, never speak of this. And of course, the board was trying to minimize everything. So I said no. and I sealed it away. And for this I am very sorry. And I'm sorry too for the way I continue to protect him, to make excuses for his behavior, to focus on the enormous good he had done and the profound teachings I had received. We all had. Even though I was deeply aware of the suffering that he had caused to so many people, including myself, despite my inability to admit it. I wish I could have cut through that mental gridlock at that moment in 2010 with a simple word, yes. But I couldn't then. And just recently, a very sensitive past board member sent an email to us saying, the expectation that any abuse survivor be expected to be able to confess on demand and share such personal pain and issues, especially in such a context after so many years, is not reasonable. That she chose not to after years is personal and certainly mixed with pain. But you know, I didn't feel I was abused back in 1975. Maybe it was pride on my part not to accept my vulnerability. But as a result of being singled out at the meeting in Shinge Roshi's confession, I did feel violated. So it's been a great koan, as I said. And now, and this is really why I wanted to share it with you, having looked deeply into all of this and looking into the whole of it, I feel I can let some 62 years of childhood and adulthood, secrecy and shame be opened up. Let the air in and purify it all. So, breathing in, nothing is excluded. The beauty, the ugliness, the hardship, the joy, the whole universe Breathing out. Letting it all go. Nothing held back. Just this simple exchange. Life